Without further ado, I am thrilled to announce our Q&A this year. So for the last couple of years, we've been bringing a student who took the Philanthropy Lab course who's doing something interesting in the sector to come and share their experience. And so this year we have Christiana, who took the class at Stanford in 2018, was also an ambassador in your shoes 5 years ago, and has been working in the sector at King Philanthropies for 5 years. And so Kyle Gammenthaler, who teaches at Texas A&M, is going to ask her some questions in this Q&A format. I will let you guys do your thing. Thanks, y'all.
I'm excited to have a conversation here. This is her show, not mine. So I'm gonna, it's not very often that you get to see the future version of yourself up here. And so we were just talking a few minutes ago, and she was like, "Yeah, I was a student. It's a different world now since when I was here." And so I'm excited to hear from you and your perspective. Let's just start with maybe a little bit of background. You don't have to give us from every detail, but share a little bit about what kind of led you to take the class. What do you remember about that experience as a student, and then maybe kind of a little bit of experience, and we'll navigate from there at that point.
Sure, yeah. Like Bethany shared, I'm Christiana, and I took the class, I think, in 2017, and then I came to the Ambassadors Conference later that summer in 2018. At Stanford, I majored in international relations. I specialized in economic development there. I also minored in psychology. I ended up taking Bruce Seaver's class, the Philanthropy Lab class at Stanford, because it was required for the fellowship that I was doing. I did a corporate social responsibility fellowship through the Stanford Haas Center, which does social service at Stanford. And I worked at Intel in their CSR department, realized that I didn't really love the world that much, but it allowed me to take the class and learn about philanthropy, and that got me really interested in the sector, in the funder side, and eventually led me to my job at King Philanthropies.
Cool. So I teach at a business school. So you mentioned CSR, and we got to talk about it. So we'll spend just a minute or two. What you mentioned you didn't really like the experience as much, maybe you thought. Can you talk about when you think about CSR in a business context up against the philanthropic kind of engagement that we're doing, how that goes together or doesn't go together? What did you not like about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's absolutely crucial to have CSR and to have corporations and private donors involved in philanthropy. And so, of course, there's corporate philanthropy, and then there's CSR. Corporate social responsibility is usually a corporation's arm that does social good and also makes sure that the company doesn't do anything that will get them in trouble. And so oftentimes CSR is in the marketing department. And so when I was at Intel, I was actually on the marketing team. And in my personal opinion, a lot of those jobs are a lot of marketing, and you don't really get to do the bread and butter of social impact that I felt really passionate about. I do think it's really important. I think there's a few companies that are doing it somewhat well, but at the end of the day, a company's bottom line is going to be profit, and so there needs to be people who do that and who do that well. It just wasn't aligned with what I wanted to do, yeah.
So you move into King Philanthropies. I was looking at the timeline. Was this your first job out of college working for them? And you've been there since?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, wow. Okay. So talk to us maybe a little bit about what it was like starting in philanthropy after having practiced philanthropy. Mm-hmm. I mean, really the type of experience you're getting here is more than most people are getting prior to their first job in philanthropy. So what was it like going into it with that mindset? How did that change your perspective?
Yeah, I will say that because we've been recruiting the last year or two, everyone in this room is super well positioned because it is rare to find candidates that have grant making experience, especially young people right out of graduation, right out of college, to have some sort of background in what philanthropy is even like. I think we even stopped really hiring people right out of college. I was the only one, and we've just hired older and older just because the need is so great for people to catch on quickly, especially we're a smaller family foundation and we move really fast. And so everyone in this room, this is such a valuable opportunity to practice these grant-making skills. It definitely helped me. It helped me get my job. They were really impressed that I knew about the world of philanthropy, what's out there, what the grant-making process looks like. Do you want me to share a little bit about KP?
Sure.
Just
Yeah,
to set the
yeah.
context?
Probably be helpful to get some context of what we're actually talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, so King Philanthropies is a family foundation. It's Bob and Dottie King's money. They're this really sweet couple in their mid-80s. Bob was an angel investor, and he made his fortune off of doing some really smart investments early on in his life. And because of that, he developed a passion for international development and for giving away money and for making an impact. And so that's what we as a team do. Our mission is to catalyze solutions at the intersection of improving livelihoods, so especially for the world's poorest people, and also mitigating climate change. And this is something that's pretty interesting in our foundation. When I started, we were solely devoted to international development and targeting the root causes of poverty, such as land rights, girls' education, smallholder agriculture, primary health care, et cetera. And Bob, over the time in his career, noticed how much climate change was impacting the lives of the world's poorest people, and so he integrated that into our mission, and that's now a core part of what we do. And so I think that's interesting, working at a family office. You know, it is really at the discretion of your founders sometimes, and so I feel like I've had 3 different roles in the time I've been at KP. I know with my peers, not all of them have stayed in their first role for 5 years. I did so because it was very interesting for me. I've had many different positions within the company. I started doing the pure grant-making international development work. I moved on our nutrition team as we made a large $150 million commitment to nutrition. I moved on to that team. And then most recently in my current role, I moved on to our climate impact investing team. So we started off doing grant making, and now we also do impact investments. And that is really to target climate change and the breadth of organizations and the types of organizations that are out there. And to also be able to make the most impact, we wanted to deploy the most flexible type of funding.
So I don't think this question was on the list. But being in the world of philanthropy, you mentioned climate change. There's significant need in finite resources, no matter how big the organization is. How do you navigate entering into a space that you alone can't fulfill every need, but yet you still do it, which is why we're all here. How do you think about that tension, or how does your organization think about it?
Yeah, so obviously every foundation has a set amount of resources. You can't fund every single thing out there. That's why foundations have a mission, and I think for anyone interested in going into the field, you really want to look for a foundation that has a strong mission focus. You can't fund everything, and I think, you know, there's different types of foundations, but those that kind of go a little bit everywhere, it might be hard depending on what your passions are. And so for us, we talk a lot about the term catalytic, and to us that term means what would not have happened without our investment. And so when we look at investment, we need to see what the step change would be for us in our funding. So whenever we look at an organization, we want to know, for example, because we have this focus on international development, a lot of domestic funding for climate change, a lot of climate change funding is domestic. People are very US focused. They look at technologies that can scale within the US. Obviously, in poorer countries, climate change is having a massive, way bigger impact, but the technologies are not ready to scale there yet, and they're not originating from there. And so our niche, and I think every foundation needs to have one, is to look at investments, even if they are starting in the US. So we invest pre-seed to Series A, and so very early stage in some of these organizations. We want to help those organizations, if they have a passion, and that's a criteria we look for, to scale to emerging markets, so markets in the developing world. we help them to get there, whether that be in 10 or 15 years. That is kind of our niche. If an organization, for example, is in the US, and we see that the founders have a passion to one day scale this to Africa, we will help them and be on their board. We'll take a large seat and portion of their company so that we can help keep the investors honest to that mission. And so we really ask ourselves every time, like, what do we bring to this deal? What, if any other funder could fund it, if the Bezos Earth Fund can come in, if Mackenzie Scott, whoever it be, can come in and scale the rest of it, we see no reason for ourselves to be there.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, and we'll come back, we'll jump around a little bit. In the world of philanthropy, working for it, you're probably not every day writing checks, giving money away, although that would be nice. What does for those that are interested in working in this space, what is a day, there may not be a normal day, but what's a regular routine that you have, or what kind of does your work life look like for those that might be interested in working for a philanthropy or for a foundation?
Yeah, so I can speak very specifically to King Philanthropies. We're a very small team. We're also not very small. We are 15 people, I would say, but we are also a very flat and nimble team. And so this will be so different if you go and work for the Gates Foundation. They have really specific roles, really specific issue areas. They have people just to do the grant agreements and process the checks, and they have other people who are actually sourcing the deals, talking with the partners, and then we have people who are experts in nutrition or healthcare. We at KP are a team of generalists, and we also are very nimble. We call it a team of teams model, and so everyone can step up if there's a project for what they would like to do. I talk with our CEO very frequently, at least once a week, with our managing director every day. We can text, call, and so we kind of follow traditional roles like at a consulting firm, depending on, the level of responsibility you're taking on, but less than the title on a day-to-day. My role looks like going to conferences and sourcing deals, meeting new partners, meeting what nonprofits might be out there, especially for the grant side, meeting with other funders, learning about what excellent nonprofits exist in the issue areas that we are funding in. I do a lot of analysis and research on, if I'm on the nutrition team, then I would be looking at what are the latest white papers in nutrition, keeping up to date with research. I talk a lot with our founders. If they have something that comes their way, our team will be the first to vet it so that we don't have to take calls with all the organizations, but we'll, take a brief look at their website and see if this is something that might interest us. We also do a lot of movement building, and so if we have a group of grantees focused on, for example, agroforestry, then we like to put on conferences or get people in a room together that are similar and like-minded and try to create these synergies between our grantees. And a lot of foundations are feeling the weight of the macroeconomic situation, the difficult economy currently, and so a lot of what we're doing, if we're not deploying as many grants, we do a lot of this network building and trying to enhance our relationship with our grantees and add value to them in ways that might not just be grants, but connecting them with other people, et cetera.
Do you have a particular grant or investment or something you'll have done that you've been a part of that you are particularly proud of, that you have enjoyed working on, or something like that? Is there one that stands out, or a few if you have them, but one is there one that jumps into your mind, like that one that was cool, I'm glad we did that, or I'm glad I was a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually don't fund a ton of grantees, and so I remember each and every one of them. I've actually been the longest person in our company now besides our CEO, and so I have a good purview into what those grants have looked like. Part of it is because we like to deploy large check sizes, and so minimum we'll do like $3 million over 3 years for each of our grantees. And so this particular grantee, CamFed, is probably one of my favorite. We're not supposed to have favorites, but it's a really excellent organization. They do girls' education in Africa, and they have this amazing network of women. So every woman that CamFed supports to go to school, just naturally they end up wanting to give back. So each woman goes on to fund 3 other women to attend school. And so we have this incredible return on investment that if we fund, for example, 3,000 girls to go to school, each of those girls will go on to help 3 other girls go to school, and each of those 3 girls will fund 3 girls each. And, you know, they've kept track of this. It's anywhere from 3 to 10 girls that they're supporting, and it's just this incredible, powerful women network that they're creating. And I think this is a great example of the synergies between impact investments and grants that can be there that we're trying to facilitate. I will say my favorite impact investment is probably in source hydro panels, and these are these really cool panels that basically create water out of sunlight and air. And it's this new technology. It's great.
I know how it works. You tell us how it works. Just for those that don't know how hydro something works.
So, you know, we have climate scientists on the team for this very reason, because it's not my background, but I will say that the org, it's in their Series D, so it's much later than we usually fund, but we were very excited. They take the hydrogen and oxygen molecules out of the air, and they're converting them to water in this solar panel, and so it's powered by the sun. And one thing that I was hearing from the girls from CamFed was that the girls were having trouble attending school because of droughts caused by climate change. They had to walk further and further to get to water. And so we had this great idea. We have this investee, Source Hydro Panels. Can we give CamFed money as a grant to buy Source Hydro Panels and install them in schools that CamFed's working in? And so we've deployed this now in Zimbabwe, Zambia. It's definitely difficult, but this is the prime example of how we get these private companies to move into emerging markets and see how useful that could be. Obviously for people in the States, but especially for people who don't have easy access to water and have a lot of sun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we don't always have successes in philanthropy. Not every grant or investment goes exactly as anticipated. So I'm hesitant to say failure, but like, is there something that hasn't worked as anticipated? Maybe you learned from it, or maybe one where you're just like, we just missed the ball on that one, and we tried, but we got to move on. Is there one that either you've been a part of or experienced, or one that's kind of being talked about within the organization where it's like, yeah, we did the best we could, but it didn't work out the way we had hoped it would?
Right. I think this is really interesting because the more money you give to an organization, the likelier that organization has a lot of successes to show, randomized control trials to show for their research and their intervention. And then when you have smaller check sizes, you are more willing to take risks, you are willing to see these failures, you're willing to do pilot projects. And so we have, you know, foundations that give check sizes like maybe 250K to 500K, and then we have the mezzanine level, kind of where KP is at. We'll do like maybe the $3 to $20 million check sizes per grant, and then you have like the Gates Foundation, and then you have like multilateral or unilateral, like USAID or DFID, or these big corporations that, I mean, organizations that, you know, they will not look at something unless they can absorb that organization or that project, can absorb maybe like $10 million plus. And with those, there's so much bureaucracy. I mean, there's a lot of controversy around how difficult it is to work with some of these orgs, like the World Bank, or how long it takes and how hard it is for grantees to access that funding. And it is because they are so scared with that amount of money to deploy it to a risky organization, and so those will usually go to, you know, the UNICEFs or the CARES of the world. And so I think because we did fund at this mezzanine level, we really looked for organizations that had really strong leadership, that weren't likely to fail. And so I don't have any failure stories in that because it took so much diligence to get to that, but I will say that there were a couple organizations that I did the smaller check sizes for, and those, it really isn't the check size that determines how much work an organization is. I think with our like $300 check size to $15 million check size, I spent more time on the 300K check size organization because it was earlier stage. I had to work with the founders a lot more, and so I will say that is maybe one of our investments where we took a risk pilot. Their intervention wasn't proven. The leader, he was very charismatic and lovely, but for example, this was a nutrition nonprofit, but his background was like, he was a football player, really interested in nutrition, et cetera. And so, you know, usually we wouldn't go for it, but because it was a smaller check size, we decided we would. And we haven't heard from them in a couple years, and we've been like begging them for the reporting, and so I think we try to do these little pilots into different kind of funding mechanisms, and we decided that wasn't necessarily for us. Impact investments, I think, look different.
We've known each other for 21 minutes now. I feel like I can ask you, how do you navigate your personal approach to philanthropy while working for an organization that has its own priorities, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you got lucky and the things you care about are also the things they care about, which is awesome. But how do you navigate your own approach to philanthropy and giving and volunteering and the usage of your resources? What does that look like for you personally? How do you navigate that?
I think that's a really great question, because I think it's so important. I think personally for me, because I need to feel driven in my job every day. Not everyone needs that. So for some people, a job is just a job. They won't really care what they're doing on a day-to-day. For me, I will not want to show up to the day if I don't feel passionate about what we're doing. And so I would say for people who feel the same way that I do, it's so important to look for a foundation whose mission really aligns with your passions and your values. You're not going to find a perfect one, but for me, it was pretty close to perfect. As I mentioned, majored in international relations. I've always been interested in economic development, even since middle school. And so when I
did see in your bio you started something when you were young. You started an
Yeah.
organization. Is that?
Yeah, I had always been interested in philanthropy. I had always seen like the power of money over time, giving it away. That's what these organizations need is money to scale. So, when I saw the job posting for KP, or my advisor at the time recommended it, there's not a lot of foundations there are a few jobs that were solely focused on international development. There are a lot of domestically focused organizations, and so I emailed the recruiter and I said, "This is my dream job. These are my passions." And I laid it out for her, and I got the job a week later, because they said it was so clear how passionate I was about the mission and about what we do. And with our grantees, I feel so lucky to work with them. They're these amazing organizations, and so I would highly recommend that. If you're passionate about healthcare, don't go to a foundation that doesn't do anything in healthcare. If you're passionate about a certain issue area, finding something that aligns not only with your interests, but also probably your expertise and how you've chosen to spend your time over the last few years is so important for job satisfaction. Not everyone's going to get that. Sometimes you have to take a few steps to get there, and that is totally okay. I've seen a lot of my peers jump from job to job to find that. I don't think it's, you don't need to find that right after you graduate, but I think you have this North Star that you're trying to go towards, so that hopefully what you do is aligned with your passion.
That's great. So we do have some questions rolling in. I don't know if there's any that, when you take a look at them, if there's any that interest you to...
Yeah. Okay, I have them on my phone as well, so let's see.
Probably a good time to jump into that.
Okay, I'll just take them from here, actually. Okay, this is interesting. It says, philanthropy as a sector is notorious for low staff retention and high career turnover. In your experience, why is this the case? What do your peers who left KP do now? So I think this is interesting, because from what I've seen, I don't see a lot of turnover, actually, because foundation jobs are usually highly sought after, and I mean, it depends on where you work, obviously, but hopefully if you find one whose mission aligns with your passions, and a lot of people stay for a while. But I can speak to, I've had several of my colleagues leave over time, why they left. Some of them have left for graduate school. I myself, after 5 years, am leaving for graduate school. Some of them, during COVID, I think that was a huge shift in foundation land. A lot of it's meeting with people in person, and since a lot of that moved to Zoom, I think at one point in our foundation, we decided to have everyone in person, and people left because of that. I'm trying to think. I think some others, if they have trouble with the bureaucracy within some of the larger foundations, they get really tired of that, or they want to start their own program or have the flexibility that KP does. And so we've had people come from larger foundations to become like managing directors or program directors at our company because they can really own that portfolio and do the grants that they feel they're really passionate about within our organization. I will say, on the other hand, something that's really hard in the field and something that I am also leaving to get a break from is, giving away money that's not yours for an extended period of time. I think you get really used to a certain type of lifestyle or dynamic with your grantees, and I think it's so important to get a break from that, immerse yourself in the world, get experience in fundraising, put yourself in the shoes of a nonprofit and see what it's like to have to constantly, prove your mission and work really hard. And so I think it's important to get different skill sets. And because I started in philanthropy, I think for people who have the opportunity to work in the private sector, in the philanthropic sector, the public sector, just get different experiences and see how all of these organizations fit into, societal systems level change and how each has a part, like the government, private corporation, CSR. It could be really helpful for someone's career development.
Yeah, you mentioned going to graduate school. What, just before we get to other questions, what's that going to look like for you, or what do you want it to look like? And then where do you see, I'm assuming, I'm just going to guess, you have some kind of plan for what you would like to use that next step for. What do you envision the next few years or steps in your life looking like?
I think it's really interesting. A lot of people, at least in the foundations in the Bay Area where I was for 6 years, they go on to do their MBA, or they have come to become a program director after doing their MBA. So I'm getting my MBA just because it has been so helpful for my CEO, for my program manager, for managing director, to have that network, because a lot of philanthropy is networking. It is meeting other great leaders and social entrepreneurs. And so that's what I'll be doing afterwards. Something that was interesting that I would have never expected was how exciting impact investing was for me, and especially in climate change and getting to meet, these earlier stage technologies and founders. And so I hope post-MBA to kind of pivot to that and try my hand at climate change investing on the for-profit side. And it'll be a part of me testing my impact thesis. I don't know if I'll return to philanthropy, maybe, but just getting another piece of that puzzle. Yeah. Okay, this question asks what separates a gift or a grant from an impact investment. And so an impact investment will be in a for-profit company. You'll take equity or a stake into that company. It looks a little different. You'll get that money back maybe, hopefully, depending on your impact investing philosophy, if you are optimizing for your returns or the impact. I will say one piece on impact investing. Our CEO used to call it kind of like a houseboat. So not a great house, not a great boat. So you either maximize or optimize for the impact, or you can optimize for the returns, and it's very rare that you can do both. Personally, I believe that that can be applied to climate change very specifically, and that you can see the impact and the returns aligned, what with Biden's infrastructure bill, and also a lot of scaffolding from the public and private sectors, everyone interested in climate change as a social good for everyone, but also a for-profit opportunity. We can see the organizations that we've been giving money to for profit making the same returns as any other private company out there, and so we don't sacrifice returns in any way. I don't think this is applied to education, health, a lot of other sectors that I believe should be mostly nonprofit funding, and so I do want to make that distinction because impact investing gets kind of a very positive rep in certain circles, but you really have to be careful about what that means and do your own research and see what you're trying to optimize for in that situation. So this one asks about what experiences became my resume, building opportunities, and made me a hireable candidate. Like I said, I think taking a class like this and having previous philanthropic experience is huge. I think also we've hired some interns, and the ones that we've hired, we've seen really strong analytical skills, a strong commitment to the mission, activities that have aligned with the kind of organizations that we fund. Showing up to a job interview, doing your research is key in what the organization's issue areas are, coming prepared with one or two grantees that you felt really resonated with you, that you can talk about in your interview. Your past experiences, I think, are all crucial as well. At the end of the day, a lot of companies, and you'll hear this a lot, hire for culture fit. And so if you can do an informational interview with someone at the company, maybe similar to the level that you'd be entering at, and ask them very candidly what the culture looks like. You know, when you're recruiting for a job, it's not whether you just want the job, it's also whether the job is good for you, whether you'll be happy there, what kind of individuals work there. When we talk about employee retention, I think we've had the fastest turnover over the last year because we started hiring, people from private equity or, very traditional finance roles to come and help us do some of these impact investments. And I think that was the hardest part, was the culture shock sometimes. And we had a very specific group of individuals for philanthropy, and then, just coming from the private sector and not having a development background and hiring those people, it was actually very difficult. They ended up leaving within 9 months to a year. And so both on the hiring side and also on the recruiting side, that culture fit, I think, is key. So if you can find out what that is and you feel like you're a great fit for it, you can even mention that in your interview, that you've done your research. That's also very impressive, and this is why you feel like you'd be a good fit into the company, not only with your skills, but also maybe it's your positive attitude or the ability for you to take initiative into the organization or deal with ambiguity or whatever that you discover about the company. It could be really helpful.
Before you look at this, I was going to say one of the values of having you here is that you were once in their shoes, quite literally, at this conference. This may touch on a sore subject, but we just voted a few organizations forward and said no to some organizations right before this. So 2/5 of the room did not move forward in this process. You talked about your experience at the conference. Can you speak to just that, outside of King Philanthropy, just, you to the students about that dynamic? What was your experience like, and any words of advice or wisdom that you would like to share to them about that? Yeah.
So when I was at the Ambassadors Conference, my organization got voted out first. It made it so that I could have a very objective time going forward and vote, objectively. But I will say, especially for our organization then, I was confident that they would either get the funding they needed or, I would say that's the hardest part of my job today, is having to say no to organizations, and that's the reality of it. And part of a successful organization is ability to fundraise well. Unfortunately, that's a huge part of being able to speak the language with the donors. If you don't have that, no matter how well the organization is run, it's really hard for those orgs to be sustainable over time. And so, it's always really, really disappointing, but there is so much good out there to fund as well, and so much impact happening. I think when I've had to say no to organizations that I feel are really excellent, I have hope that they will receive the funding that they need. And if they don't, I have to look at the positive side too and see all the great work that is being done in the organizations we have funded, and just that reality that we cannot fund every single thing out there. Yeah, I know it's sad though.
And if your organization was said no in 5 years, you could be here talking
Absolutely.
to us about how to do philanthropy. So
the favorite part of my job, what gets me out of bed in the morning, it's definitely the organizations that we fund. When you get to give money to an amazing entrepreneur or an organization that's doing great work, I will say on a lot of the calls where we share our funding after maybe 6 months of diligence, those founders will cry on the phone as you tell them, and because they work so hard for their mission and what they're doing. And I am absolutely humbled by that experience every single time. It is a great honor to work with these people who are incredible. Not everyone can be a CEO of a nonprofit. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur. And so those that make it and do well and are making this great impact on the world. It is an honor to know them by name, to meet them, to give them money. I have to remind myself every single day what a privilege that is, because I think at the point you get numb to that is maybe when you can go out and do other things and put yourself in those shoes too. But that is definitely the best part of my job, is to give money away to organizations that are doing great work.
Any questions that are coming to mind that you're just not typing in? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for talking to us today, Christiana. I had a question about the process after you give a grant, and I'm sure you remember, like, we have a little process of coming back in the philanthropy lab and like examining our grant and the impact that it had. How does that work for you at King Philanthropies, and what does that look like? And is it easier for you to, give money and then, let the nonprofit free, and like, how do you navigate that?
I think that's something that I really feel passionate about with KP's funding philosophy, is that we do multi-year, unrestricted grants that allow an organization to plan for the funding that's coming in. We do the large check sizes because we believe that those can make a great impact in what the organization is doing. And so after we've done all this diligence to find the organization, a key component of our relationship is just trust. And so when we give that unrestricted funding at those large check sizes, and we do multi-year to help them to plan and plan for their impact they're going to have with our funding, that just facilitates this opportunity to let them go free for whatever they need. And so it allows the funding to be really flexible. So during COVID, we were telling them, like, it's unrestricted funding. You can use them for masks. You can use them for staying home, for hiring remote employees, like whatever you need to adapt to that situation, you can use our funding for. That was written in the grant agreement. It helps them to adapt. When our education grants, they closed down all the schools. All of a sudden, they had to buy new phones to kind of communicate via WhatsApp with the mothers, et cetera. And so we want to get to the level where we trust the organization in any situation to do what is the best for them with the money. And I think that's the way that it should be. I really do believe in this unrestricted funding. And, we have them write reports every year, but we try to make it as low lift as possible. And so we always tell them once a year, we have them send in their reports, but we say, like, these are the points that we want to hear about. If you have other reports for funders, don't spend extra time to make it catered to us. You can just send along those reports along with a page of bullets that might address specifically, for example, climate change, or specifically like gender equality, or whatever it may be within that grant that we're interested in. And so we make that low lift. We have the once a year check-in calls, and then we have like as needed calls with the grantees. And I think the more honest the relationship could be, and that's difficult, the better it is. And hopefully after those 3 years, we re-up the funding and we do another 5 years or so, and create a plan of sustainability after that second tranche of funding, after the 3 years, of what exit looks like in 5 years for our funding, whether it's partnering with the government or accessing larger like buckets of money. And so that's the fun part afterwards, to keep on building on this partnership. We constantly, if we meet another organization doing something great in the space, we'll connect them. We'll try to have our grantees all meet together once a year if possible. And that's a rewarding part of the process.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of you front load too, a lot of that work on, you're not just giving big multi-million-dollar, multi-year gifts without having done the due diligence you talked about on the front end. And so that trust to let them do what they need to do is rooted in kind of probably a lot of work ahead of time to make sure they're who you want to invest in.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it really, again, depends on the check sizes. You want to go out and see the organization. You don't want to just give $10 million and then not have ever seen the work on the ground. But depending on what the organization is, there might be a lot of other peer funders in the space that have gone and visited them, can give you notes. A lot of the role is talking with other funders and seeing, what did you think very candidly of the organization? How has your experience been working with them? We really focus on the leader as well. So do you think the leader is the right person for the job, has been adaptable to changing circumstances over the last few years, et cetera.
Hi, it's so nice meeting you. My name is Kaylee. I'm from Notre Dame.
I'm actually very passionate about impact investing, and I've interned with impact investing firm. I don't know if you heard about Axion in Washington, D.C. I worked with them. So like what you said about impact investing versus like foundations really resonate with me. And I think like a common issue we see in like philanthropy in general is like measuring the impact, like you just said about the due diligence. I think in impact investing you get like a seat on the board, but versus like, you know, you're talking about unrestricted funding. So I was wondering if you ever like ran into like problems, specifically like pushing maybe like gender equality, because I think that's a big thing at Axion is that like it's hard to measure like gender equality, like DEI stuff, like diversity, equity, inclusion. Like those things are very hard to measure like in numbers, and some of the organizations, they might not have the resources or the time to evaluate or measure. So I was wondering like how does, you know, KP or other foundations differ in that regard from impact investing firms?
Definitely. I feel that in the philanthropic sector, a lot of people will focus on numbers such as number of lives reached, or if you're funding education, like what that standard deviation gain looks like. And so before we make a grant, we have a set of indicators written in the grant agreement as to how we're going to measure success of the investment. I think that's really easier to do in philanthropic funding, because you can say like, we give you X amount of money to reach, let's say 3,000 students, and you can say yes or no, did you reach those students? Was it at the education gain that you wanted to see, or like the health gain, or you know, you determine those beforehand. I think it's harder in impact investment because you take a stake in the company, but you're not necessarily able to say, because I took this percentage. It depends on what round you invest in, to know how much impact your funding specifically has. A lot of what I've seen is people measuring the success of the organization as a whole, but not necessarily like attributing that exactly to your portion of funding, which I think is harder to do. In our case, there's a lot of disagreements or a lot of conversation currently on how to measure climate impact. And so if you're trying to measure GHG emissions, for example, there's not a set standard right now on how to do it in every case. And so we recognize where we're not experts in. We're not climate change measuring experts. And so we actually just hire a third party to do that for us. And I think that's really useful, because that saves staff time, first of all, and then second of all, when we have a third party do it, we can provide that like verified data to the organization. And so these smaller organizations, they can say, oh, we actually had a third party evaluation funded by one of our investors, and we can confidently say this is the GHG emissions projections, or these are the assumptions, and we can have someone else do that work.
Okay, we are running up against the clock. So we have, you'll stick around. So those of you that still have questions, she'll still be here. But I want to say thank you for the work you've done, for investing in this process and our community and our world. I feel like you're connected to all of it now. You have 1 minute. Any strong closing statements? Do you have anything that you thought you were going to say, you wanted to say, you haven't said it, and you need to say it?
Not necessarily, but I will say that I'm so inspired by every single person in this room. The fact that you're here shows that you're dedicated to making some kind of impact on the world. And so I really encourage everyone to find their personal passion and philosophy and their impact thesis. And, you know, it's a process of discovery, and I'm very much happy. You hopefully have my email somehow, and in the booklet maybe. You can always ask and message, and I'm happy to chat with anyone, but I'm very honored to be in the room with all these people. I'm very excited to see what you all will do.
Great. Thank you.